Okay, let me show you how to take our images and put them into our project. So we're going to go back to Xcode, and I'm just going to start a new project here. So come here, we're going to go File, New Project. I'm going to do a single view app. And I'm going to call my project Image Demo SU20 for summer 20. I'm going to use the language of Swift. We're going to use a storyboard. I don't need to do core data or any UI tests, so those should all be unchecked. I'm going to click Next and simply choose where I want this to go. I'm going to save it into my folder called iOS and click Create. So our first thing here with our project folder, we can choose the devices we want. If you only want this to run on an iPad, you can uncheck the iPhone. It will not run on an iPhone. If you want to only do an iPhone and not the iPad, you can do the opposite. If you only want this to be portrait or want this to be landscape, you can check those boxes as well. I'll stick with an iPad. I'm going to make it, though, only landscape left or landscape right. So I'm going to make sure that you have to look at this in landscape mode. My iOS target is 13.2. If you're working on a newer device, you can go upwards, or newer version of Xcode, you can go upwards. That's the top that I have. I'm on Xcode 11.3. And I'm going to come over to my storyboard. Okay, so for the storyboard, I'm going to design for an iPad. I'm going to do the iPad 10.5 because that's what I have. And I want this to be landscape orientation. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit here so I can see my storyboard.
I have a real quick question.
Yes.
This goes back to the two programs you have that take the Photoshop file and make them into JPEG.
Yes.
Do we have to create an iOS folder first?
No, it will create the folder for you.
Okay, thank you.
And it creates that folder as a subfolder wherever that PSD file is. So what I would probably do as a developer, I'd probably create a folder for a particular project. Let's say we're doing something for Honeywell. They're my clients. Okay, so I'm going to have a Honeywell folder, and then in that folder, if I'm only creating one app, then I'll put all the Honeywell images in that folder, and then when I run the script on those images, it'll create an iOS folder inside that Honeywell folder.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good question.
Following along, so I changed my simulator to an iPad Pro 11-inch because that's what I have available. But it still looks like a phone on my screen.
So you have to come down here and choose at the bottom that you want to view this as an iPad Pro 11-inch.
Oh, okay.
So you can do it. Once you choose iPad or choose your device here, you can actually choose this way as well, what you want.
Okay.
And then change the orientation so it's landscape.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to design this just for landscape. All right. By the way, so I have my view controller here, my blank storyboard, and we have, I'm just going to select that. We have over here in our panels on the right-hand side, the attributes inspector. I want to change the background here to be black color. Okay, so I'm going to make it black. Then I'm going to bring up my library. What we're going to do is use an UIImage view. Now, what you can do up here in the objects is you can just type image, and it's going to show you image view. I'm going to drag that over, and I'm just going to position it up here in the upper left-hand corner. In fact, I am going to go ahead and get rid of my library, just get it out of the way. Now, with that image view, I want to make sure it's selected. I'm going to come over to the attributes panel, but then to the right of that is the size inspector. So I'm going to go to the size inspector, And I don't remember the size that I want here. I think it was 600 width. We'll try that first, see what that gets us. No, it's gonna be more than that. Let's try 900. All right, we'll try 1,000. Now again, this is not necessarily pixels. This is in units. Oh, I think I do recall this. I used 1,200 earlier. So let's try 1,200. No, too much. 1,100. That's pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to move this over a little bit. So basically pretty much going left to right. I've got a real slight margin on the left and right, and a little bigger on the top. So I'm going to use the shift up arrow in my case. I'm going to nudge this up 10 units at a time. So I'm kind of getting the same top margin is what I want. Now I want to change the height. Remember, we have 3,000 by 2,000. So 2/3 of 1,100 is what? I'm not sure. I can bring up a calculator. I just go to Photoshop, or go to Excel rather. So I'm going to bring up Excel, and I'm just going to type in equals. So I'm here 1,000 times, 1,100 times 0.67. And my answer is 737. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to change the height to 737. Okay, so there is an image view that is going to be the same resolution, width, and height as the images I want to use. And that becomes important. We don't want to distort our images. And we don't want to crop our images. Okay, we'll come back and do some more things with the image view here in a minute. I'm going to bring up my library again. And this time I'm going to take a button. There, and I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to take this button, I'm going to stretch it out a little bit, and probably a little bit higher height. I'm going to go to the Attributes Inspector for that button. So my button's selected, Attributes Inspector. I'm going to come down towards the bottom and find the background, and I want to change the color. Now, we have some standard colors here. We have system colors that you can set the system color through the OS. That might be a little dangerous, or you might want to have the user be able to change the color based on their system. I'm going to click the custom down here. And so on the custom, I can actually design a custom color that I want. And I'm going to do kind of a really light blue, a periwinkle blue maybe. So let's bring these all up a little bit, but I want the blue pretty much all the way to the right-hand side at 255. I get this little light blue color. That looks pretty good to me. Now, maybe I don't want the text to be blue for the button, so we can change that also. So in the Attributes Inspector towards the top, we have text color. I'm just going to click on that, and again, I'm going to choose black for my text color. I'm going to get rid of this little color panel. And for my button text, I'm going to highlight through button. Let's capitalize the G. I'm going to make this Grand Canyon. Okay, now I'm going to take that button, select it, and paste. And I just did a Control-C or Command-C, Command-V to paste. I'm going to move this one over a little bit. Only thing I'm going to change here is the title. So I want this one to be Montezuma's Castle. Hopefully that'll fit the width. And it does. So if it's too narrow, you can, if your button's too narrow to fit it, you can stretch the button out a little bit. Or you can just put Montezuma there. That would suffice. And then I'm going to select both of those buttons and paste. So now I'm creating 2 additional ones. And so this third one, let's make this one Hoover Dam. The fourth one, I'm just going to make it Oak Creek. And actually, I'm going to copy and add one more that I didn't have before, since we had that Sedona image. I'm going to add another one that just says Sedona. And you could adjust the spacing on these a little bit. I'm just going to do it kind of visually, drag this one over a little. And that's pretty much good enough for my purposes here.
Is there a way to align them equal distance apart?
There is, and that's setting up constraints, which
Okay.
I find extremely difficult in Xcode. We're going to look at that when we get to auto layout. We set up rules for how things are laid out mathematically based on other objects so that I can have a device that looks good on an iPhone versus an iPad or different types of phones, different resolutions. That to me is the hardest part of this whole process. We're going to look at that next week.
I tried the other day and I was like, I give up.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. There's a couple of videos I'm going to have you look at. I think one is by Chris Ching, that he's pretty good at this stuff. This is where the new Swift UI that I'm excited about. I haven't played with it yet. But rather than using storyboards and designing visually, Swift UI, you can lay it all out mathematically and via code. And for me, I think that will be much easier than using the storyboard constraints. And in some cases, you basically do either way, storyboard or Swift UI. I've seen different comparisons, and Swift UI by a lot of people seems to be a little bit faster, but I think it's a little bit better when you want to design for multiple devices. Hang on, my dog now wants to go back in. Okay, so our next step is we need to get the images into our project. So what I'm going to do here over on the navigator panel on the far left is I'm going to open up that assets.xcassets folder. I'm going to double click on it. And we have one thing in our assets right now, and that is the app icon. Right now we don't have an app icon assigned. So it's basically going to use the standard Xcode icon. But here's where we would add icons to our projects. And we're going to do that a little bit down the road. What we want to do now is I want to add images into our xcassets. Down here towards the bottom in this white navigator panel for our assets, there's a little plus sign. So I'm going to click that. I'm going to say new image set. And I'm going to change the name of this one to Sedona. So here is the image assets for Sedona. And notice we have a 1x, a 2x, and a 3x. So I'm going to bring up my Finder. And I'm going to go into my iOS folder where I have those. And I'm going to come back into Xcode. And actually, what I'm going to do to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to not maximize the screen so I can have it open and my Finder over here. I'm going to make the Finder a little bit smaller. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that Sedona 1X and I'm going to drag it to the 1X box. I'm going to drag the 2X to the 2X box and the 3X to the 3X box. Now it's quite possible that you would create an application that might have 100 images or 1,000 images. Can you imagine having to drag 3,000 copies of your images into these assets? Used to be that way. Now, though, I'm going to show you a shortcut. So we got the stone in there, and I could do the same thing for the Grand Canyon, the Hoover Dam, the Montezuma, and the Oak Creek. Instead, I'm going to select my Grand Canyon, hold down the Shift key. I already got the stone in there, so I'm just going to click Oak Creek and select all those files. Here's the magic of the latest versions of Xcode. I'm going to drag over here to my assets. There we go. I'm going to drag over here. And it creates those assets based on the name of the file. It doesn't remove any spaces. But here's my Grand Canyon, my Hoover Dam, my Montezuma's Castle, my Oak Creek, with the 3 versions of each. This is why it's handy to put all of it in one folder. We can just drag everything over. And the only thing in that folder are the 1X, the 2X, and the 3X images.
Does it need to have the at 3x, at 1x, and everything?
It
for
does.
the
You want those
text?
named that way before you drag them. Yes, otherwise it doesn't know where to put them.
Okay, thanks.
Now, you can technically just put one image in here. I'd probably do the 2x. Most devices are the 2x or 3x. The 1x is actually really old devices. And Xcode will basically resize that image for the device. It might look bad. So before you distribute anything, in fact, I don't think they will allow you to put stuff on the store that does not have the 1x, 2x, and 3x versions of every image. Same way, they won't let you put stuff on the store that you do not have all these different versions of the icons. And notice there are lots of versions of icons. 40 by 40, 60 by 60, 58 by 58, 87 by 87, 120 by 120, 180. Here's a 29. Here's a 76. Here's a 167. You have to create all those icons. And again, what I do, actually the biggest one here is 1024 by 1024. I design an icon in Photoshop as 1024 by 1024. I'm going to provide you a JavaScript file that will then create all these other ones based on that original 1024 by 1024. Okay? And then you just drag them in. So again, Apple won't let you put stuff up on the store unless you have all of those. Same with the images. You want all three versions here. Other questions on the assets? I think I can look at any one of these. If you wanted to modify one of these, you can actually double click here and it'll open, I think, into Photoshop. I'll give you a chance. Where do you want to open it? Just right click. Oh, okay, I stand corrected. I can't open it directly in Photoshop. I can show it in the Finder though. So I can go to the Finder. Where's it on my computer? And then from there, I can open it into Photoshop. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is to program our project. So I'm going to go back to the storyboard. And at this point, I'm going to go back to full screen. I'm going to take my image view. And I'm going to hide my navigator panel. So I'm going to click that the third one from the third button from the right at the top. Selecting the image view, I want to come into the attributes inspector. And at the top for that image view, you'll see image. I'm going to click the drop down arrow. And look at what we get here. We get all of our assets. So I'm going to start with Grand Canyon. And I can see that image then displayed in my image view. So I'm going to start with the Grand Canyon being displayed. If you're designing for a client, maybe you want a title screen here that says, sights of Arizona. And then maybe a little bit of instructions that says, click a button below to see an image. And you can design all that in Photoshop using that text tool. That's it as far as our storyboard design and setting up the different attributes. Now, what I want to do is I want to open up my code. So I'm going to click on the little plus sign up here to add another editor. And for this editor, I'm going to come back to my project folder. Look at the breadcrumbs up here. I'm going to find my project folder and choose View Controller Swift. So there's my code. And so over here in the storyboard, actually I'm going to get rid of the inspector panel over here. Have a little more space. I'm going to probably, I don't think my code's going to be very long, so I'm just going to narrow that up a little bit. And I can see the storyboard pretty well. I could also reduce the view a little bit here if I wanted. That would probably work fine. So I'm down to 50%. Okay. I want to take that image view and I want to create an outlet for it. So review from last week. I'm going to hold down the control key and I'm going to drag to above that override function of view did load. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to name this IMG photo. And I get my outlet of the UI image view named IMG photo. Now I'm going to create an action for my button, my Grand Canyon button. So I'm going to hold down the control key again. I'm going to drag that to below that function. And make sure it says action. I'm going to give it a name. Now I'm just going to name this, again, we're naming the action or the function, not the button. So I'm going to say show image. My type is going to be a UI button. The event's going to be a touch up inside. I want the arguments to be sender. I'm going to click connect. So there's the stub for my IB action function. And I'm ready to write some code. Now we have this parameter called sender. I'm going to use that. I'm going to create a switch statement. Switch. And what I want to switch is going to be sender dot, oops, do lowercase here, current title with a capital T. The current title is the text that's on the button. And the reason I'm doing this, my curly bracket after that, is I'm going to use the same piece of code for all 5 buttons. And we're going to decide what image to display based on what the caption is of the button. So in case, of course, or a switch, we need a case. So I'm going to say case, and then Grand Canyon. I'll make sure I capitalize it the same way I did the button. So capital G, capital C with a space in between. Oftentimes what I recommend when you're doing comparison of strings is change them all to lowercase or all uppercase. You can do the, I think in Swift it's dot uppercased with parentheses, it's a method, or dot lowercased with a D. Both those have D's at the end, so it's kind of a verb. Okay, so case Grand Canyon, we put a colon after it. And what I want to do is change IMG photo that we just created as our outlet. And we're going to change the image property. So equals. And I want to access the images that are in our assets. So I can say UI image, and the I of image is capitalized, in parentheses, named, colon, and then the name of my image. Now remember, we brought those images in, it got rid of the space that was in our file names. So I went Grand Canyon without a space. Then I'm going to take those 2 lines, copy, paste. And I'm going to change Grand Canyon here to Montezuma's Castle. And then the name, and I forget if I named it Montezuma's Castle or just Montezuma. So what I might do is, I'm just going to jump back over to my Finder. I named them, looks like Montezuma's Castle. Although I think it probably took the space or the apostrophe out of the file name as well. So just to double check that, I'm going to open up my navigator. Let's go back to assets. Make sure we have the correct name here. So, oops, that's not it. There we go. Yeah, so it took the apostrophe out as well. So it's just Montezuma's Castle, capital C. And what I could do, I suppose, well, I thought maybe I could copy that. Nope. Let's try Control C. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my storyboard. Actually, it changed over here, so I'm going to go back to my code. Go to Swift. And let's get rid of the navigator. Okay, so now we're back. So I tried copying that. Let's see if it worked. And it did. Probably less time to type it than keep going back and forth, copying and paste. All right, I'm going to paste another, whoops. I want to paste another case. So again, I'm going to come in here, copy, paste. So this one, I want to change to Hoover Dam. And change this to Hoover Dam. No space. But I do want a space in the case because there's a space in the current title. Okay, I'm going to paste again. This one's going to be Oak Creek. And my file is named Oak Creek. No space. Now I can do the last one either as a default because you have to have a default. I'm going to go ahead and just do another case. And this one then is going to be Sedona. Technically, we should never hit the default because we've handled all the possibilities of our 5 buttons, but Xcode or Swift requires us to have a default value in our case structure. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the Grand Canyon one. So that's kind of what I started with. So if something goes wrong, let's say we added another button or something and we didn't add a case for it, then I wanted. We'll show the Grand Canyon. Okay, so our little problem should go away, and that is our code. Now, if we were to run this, nothing would work. Well, it would actually work, but all we'd see is the Grand Canyon because we haven't linked these other buttons to this code. So the only case that would work is Grand Canyon. And since we're starting with the Grand Canyon, we'd see nothing happen, no image would change, and it looks like the button doesn't work. So I now want to use the same action for these 4 buttons. Here's how we do it. So I'm going to take my function, and you see a little circle here with a dot in it. I'm going to hold down the control key again, and I'm going to drag up. Sorry, don't hold it down the control key, just drag to my button. So I'm just dragging from that circle to the button. We do the same thing. Drag to Hoover Dam, drag to Oak Creek, and drag to Sedona. Now, all 5 of those buttons are linked to that function. How can I make sure that that worked? I'm going to bring up my instructor or my inspector panel. And I've got Montezuma's Castle selected. I'm going to the very last inspector. This is the connections inspector. I'm going to click on that little circle with the arrow pointing to the right. And I can see here the touch up inside for that object is tied to show image. Let's check out Hoover Dam. Same thing. Its touch up inside is tied to show image. So by working with sender relating to those 5 different buttons, I can choose and handle those 5 different buttons with the switch case structure. Get rid of my inspector panel. Questions at this point before we test? All right, let's test our project. So I'm going to choose my simulator. In my case, I want the iPad Pro 10.5 inch. I would choose the simulator for whatever you design this in. And I'm then now going to run it. It'll build. It'll launch that simulator. Install the application on it. So we got a good sign there of build succeeded. And there then is the simulator with my project running. And I can click on Montezuma's Castle, Hoover Dam, Oak Creek, Sedona, Grand Canyon. Everything works. that is how we work with images in Xcode and Swift 5.
If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the iOS app development cohort playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos that I create, you can click my picture up in the top right and subscribe to the channel.